What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Nightblade. Specifically, this is a build designed around solo content, and people who are questing, who are just kind of enjoying the game on their own time, not necessarily doing any sort of dungeons or trials. They might want to do something like VMA or maybe the occasional vet dungeons, but ultimately their goal is not to necessarily do vet trials, it's to enjoy the game at their own pace. So this is a build centered around that. So now for this build, I did have to make a couple of assumptions. You don't have access to trials gear because you don't run trials that often. You don't have access to a lot of the vet dungeon monster helps because you're not doing vet dungeons very often. You don't have your access to Maelstrom or master weapons because you're not running that kind of content. So that's kind of the assumption that I had to make here. So basically, I just kind of focused in on crafted sets and purchasable sets off of guild traders to kind of make something together that combines it has a combination of good DPS while still maintaining a decent amount of survivability. So this isn't necessarily going to be a very meta build. This is again very centered around solo play. It is potentially viable for VMA, but VMA builds do require a little bit something different compared to your standard meta Nightblade approach here. So let's start off here with our gear. So if you guys saw my Stamina DK solo video, this gear is pretty much identical. So we're going with 5-piece Nightmother's Gaze on the body, and then we're going with 2-piece Kra'gh, just because Kra'gh comes from Fungal Grotto 1, which is a very, very easy dungeon to complete even on vet. So it is possible to just clear it and get your helm, and then be on your merry way. You don't have to clear it once, because to be honest, armor weight doesn't really matter too much. I have 6 medium and 1 heavy here, but as long as you have 5 medium pieces, that's all that really matters. So we do have Kra'gh, and we do have Kra'gh shoulders. It is a little bit of RNG involved in being able to do pledges each day, but you can do the pledges on normal and get your 3 keys a day, or 2 if you don't want to do the DLC pledges. So it is possible to get Kra'gh as a mostly solo player here. I do have a health enchant on my shoulders, and it is heavy. That's just to give me a little bit of additional health and survivability. But you can, of course, use your heavy piece anywhere here on the small piece. I like to put it on the small piece. The health enchant you can put really anywhere, again, as long as you have 1 health enchant somewhere. That's just to help out your survivability here, so you have a decent amount of health here. For our jewelry, we're going with 3-piece agility jewelry. I have gold because I am on the PTS and they don't give you any other options, but you can only really get this in purple or blue on the live server. This is very cheap to purchase off of guild traders. You can normally get a full piece jewelry set in robust for less than 10k. Usually I've seen them run for maybe like 6 or 7k. If you're lucky, you can get them down to like 5k gold. This is on PCNA. I don't know what prices are like on the console servers, but that's kind of a very good set to use. Agility is very powerful. It can pull blow to blow with those trial minor slayer sets, so Vicious Ophidian, so definitely keep that in mind. Now for our weapons, we're going with 1 axe and 1 dagger. You can go with double daggers. I do have a nirn on my main hand, but you don't need to use nirn. You can go with something like precise or sharpened or infused. Nirn is going to give you the best return. I do know nirn is expensive, so again, don't feel like you have to use it. You can use something like sharpened or infused. So we are going with mechanical acuity. You can go with Shacklebreaker instead. It all depends on what you have access to. So Shacklebreaker is a crafted set from Vardenfell, and Mechanical Acuity is a crafted set from Clockwork City. So you need to have access to that, or know somebody who has access to those DLCs or expansions in order to get it crafted. They both share the exact same 2-piece effect, which is weapon damage, so it doesn't really matter which set you choose as long as they are from the exact same set. So you can't go with 1 Mechanical Acuity and 1 Shacklebreaker. It has to be 2 Shacklebreaker or 2 Mechanical Acuity. Both of them are 6 trait sets, so you need to know 6 pieces, 6 research traits, I should say. And it's the same thing with Nightmother's Gaze. Nightmother's Gaze is a 6 trait set, so you need to know 6 pieces, 6 research traits in order to craft Nightmother's Gaze. Nightmother's Gaze is a base game set, though, so it is you can find it in Reaper's March, Bankurai, or the Rift. But if you don't know the enough traits to craft these sets, you can ask somebody in a trade guild or in another one of your guilds to craft it for you. A lot of people will just ask for the materials in return. You might need to throw in a tip, but for the most part you can just provide materials and they'll be able to craft it for you. You don't need necessarily to gold everything out like I have here. You can go with just purple. And for armor, you don't necessarily need to go with CP 160 either. You can go CP 150. CP 160 crafted armor does take a lot of materials. It takes 10 times as much material to craft CP 160 armor compared to CP 150 armor. So that is something to keep in mind. So you do want to, basically pay for what you can afford. CP 150 for overland content really isn't going to make that big of a difference. So don't feel like you absolutely need to farm out all the Rubido leather in order to get CP 160 gear. For your weapons though, I do highly recommend trying to get CP 160 just because you do deal a lot more damage with CP 160 weapons compared to 150 weapons. So definitely try to get CP 160 weapons if you can. For enchants on your weapons, I go with poison and weapon damage on my front bars, but you can really swap them out for any sort of damaging enchant. Even flame and shock is perfectly fine. Again, you're not really going for min-maxing here, you're just going for something that's effective in overland content. For our bow, it doesn't really matter what bow you use. You can go with a ruby ash bow, you can go with a crafted set bow. It doesn't really matter because the bow itself does not play an impact on any sort of set effects you have. I have an infused with a disease damage enchant, but like I said, you can use any sort of damaging enchant as long as it doesn't overlap with the damaging enchant you have on your front bar. That's the most important part there. And just like your main hand weapon, you want to go with CP 160 if you can. Ruby Ash is fairly quick and easy to obtain. I believe you only need 120 to craft the bow, or 130, somewhere around there. So it's relatively easy to get a CP 160 bow compared to Rubido leather or even Rubidite ingots. So that's something to keep in mind there. Now you do have another option if you don't have time to farm for Kra'gs, or don't want to get Kra'gs, or you don't want to get agility jewelry, and that's to use a set called Unfathomable Darkness. Now this is a set that comes from Clockwork City. It is the medium armor drop set there, so you can buy it off of guild traders, and I highly recommend you do so. You will need the shoulders and the helm. Oops. Nope. And then you're going to want to put in the jewelry again with all weapon damage enchants. So the main reason why we're using Unfathomable Darkness compared to any other sort of overland set is because this is the only overland set with physical penetration as one of the item bonuses, and that's kind of the weakness of solo builds. You kind of need to find your own sources of physical penetration because normally you won't have access to Major Fracture. Nightblades are different because your main spam build does provide Major Fracture, but you still want to have a little bit more additional physical penetration, especially if you want to do group content. That'll help you out a little bit more there. So if you do decide to do the occasional pledge or the occasional normal trial, it is nice to have that additional physical penetration. The 5-piece does deal a decent amount of damage as well. It's not going to be as strong as other set effects like VO or Hundings, but it is something. It does deal a good amount of damage, so don't feel like you're necessarily gimping yourself. It is not a bad set, and it's also very cheap to buy off guild traders. You can normally get the jewelry for less than 2k off the guild traders. Then just finding your helmet and shoulders is again pretty easy and pretty cheap. It's probably comparable to buy all 5 pieces to buy the jewelry. It's just easier to get Unfathomable Darkness than it is to necessarily get the Kra'gh shoulders. So this is a nice set to kind of tide you over until you manage to get Kra'gs. But your weapon and enchants and everything else remains exactly the same here. For our attribute points, I put all my points into stamina, and that's because Nightblades do have an additional passive that helps boost their health. So you don't necessarily need to put points into health, but you can if you feel like you need a little bit more survivability there. I wouldn't put any more points than 10 points into health, because at that point you're starting to give up a little bit too much into your DPS, your max stamina pool. So that is something to keep in mind there. For Munda Stone, I don't actually have a Mundus on right now, but you would be using the Lover. You give yourself a little bit more penetration. That really helps out in solo content. If you don't want to use the Lover, though, you can go with the Warrior. That's another good option to take, or you can also go with the Thief. The Thief is also not a terrible choice either. I am using blue food, so max health, max stamina food. So you just want to use level appropriate food. You normally buy this off of guild traders, or you can craft it yourself. The recipes actually aren't that expensive. They're normally less than 1k normally, so you can just buy them off guild traders and then make them yourself if you have the skill points invested into provisioning. Otherwise, you can ask somebody to craft it for you, or you can buy it off of guild traders. It is pretty cheap to get blue food off of guild traders. For our skills, this is going to be where it deviates the most from your standard meta Nightblade build. For our front bar, we're going with Mirage. This gives us major evasion, minor resolve, minor ward, which just helps out the survivability. We have surprise attack, deadly cloak. This helps out the survivability as well. Blood Craze for the additional heal over time, and relentless focus. This is just there to give you a little bit of extra burst, because that sexual bro does deal a really nice amount of damage there, and it is nice to have that damage there. For our front bar ultimate, we have Flawless Dawnbreaker. Now, if you don't have your fighter skills up to level 10, you can replace this with other morphs here. So you can go with the dual wield ultimate. I would go with Rend instead of Thrive in Chaos, but it's kind of up to you how you want to deal with it. Rend generally is the accepted ultimate there. It deals more damage, or at least it deals damage over time. For a longer period of time, so you're not necessarily going to be able to get the most out of Rend. You can go with Thrive and Chaos instead, which does deal a little bit more additional damage compared to the duration, but it doesn't really matter which one you choose. But this is an option if you don't have Flawless Dawnbreaker. Another option is going to be Soul Shred. You can do Soul Tether. I would recommend Soul Tether over Soul Siphon. It just stuns enemies and heals you as long as you stay close to them. So it is nice to have that that stun and that heal as well, and it costs just as much as Rend does. So it's up to you. But Dawnbreaker is going to be the stronger ultimate because of that additional weapon damage you get. Plus, it does deal a decent amount of damage as well, and it is a fairly cheap ultimate. For your back bar here, we have Resolving Vigor. You do need to PvP into Cyrodiil. I believe it's rank 4 you get Vigor, so you will have to PvP a little bit, but it's not that hard to get up to rank 4. An hour or two in Cyrodiil is enough to get up to rank 4. Just type in looking for a group in zone chat, and you'll normally get picked up by a Zerg in any of the 3 alliances really. So I would recommend at least grinding out to Vigor. I would highly recommend trying to go all the way up to 6 so you can get caltrops, but that's not necessary if you don't intend on doing trials. Poison Injection and Endless Hail are our next 2 abilities. Pretty standard, cut and dry. Leeching Strikes, this will help out your survivability as well as your sustain, because it does heal you and restore stamina for your light and heavy attacks, so it's nice to have that sustain and heal. And then Power Extraction here, this is mainly for the Major Brutality boost, since we're assuming we're not going to be using any weapon damage potions, or weapon power potions I should say. So this is nice. You do need to actually hit somebody, and it does have an 8 meter radius, so you do need to get somewhat within melee range in order to get the Major Brutality buff, but it is a very powerful buff to have, and it is self-applied, so you don't need to use any potions. And for our ultimate, we're using Incapacitating Strike. This is nice. It does stun enemies, and it does increase the damage you deal to them by 20% for a nice 6-second duration. Plus, it deals a pretty hefty amount of damage as well, 12k damage. So it is a nice ultimate to use. The really big benefit of this is the fact that it's so cheap. It costs 70 ultimates, so it's a very cheap ultimate to get. You can normally get 1 or 2 out very easily within each fight. You can double bar Incapacitating Strike too, so instead of Flawless Dawnbreaker here, you can also just put down Incapacitating Strike here and be on your merry way there. So you can double bar it if you don't have access to Flawless Dawnbreaker to put on your front bar here. And finally, as for CP, I will put a link down in the description below to the CP distribution videos. So you're going to basically be using the same CP distribution for endgame PvE players. So I will put a link down below for my endgame Stamina Nightblade build, as well as the leveling CP distribution guide for Stamina DPS. So you can just follow those 2 guides there as you're allocating your CP point distribution. So real quick, just to kind of show you guys how you would go about using this build. Basically, you would make sure to have yourself buff with Relentless Focus and Siphoning attacks. Have those up, and then you can use Mirage. And then you just go in. You start off with your Power Extraction. Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Deadly Cloak, and then you can just heavy attack, use Rending Slashes, or you can just spam your surprise attacks. And then once you get your bow proc, you can just use your bow proc. And then you just keep everything up, and that's pretty much it. The most important thing is really to have siphoning attacks up, because that's a very nice heal every time you light attack, as well as it gives you back stamina. And you want to try to keep Mirage up as well. That'll give you a little bit more survivability with the minor resistance buffs as well as the major evasion. You don't necessarily need to keep up power extraction. That's just there for the major brutality buff. It's not as important for overland content. And same thing with Relentless Focus. That's just there for the additional damage boost. It's not incredibly important for you to keep that up during a fight. So siphoning attacks and Mirage are probably the most important two buffs you want to maintain. And if you do feel like you need a heal, pop your Vigor. It'll heal you for a pretty hefty amount. I think it's a 10k to 12k heal from your Vigor. So that pretty much heals you from about half health all the way up to full over 5 seconds. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.